History made, with Kamala Harris becoming the first black woman to participate in a VP debate. History aside, this was always going to be a fight about the administration's handling of the coronavirus, and this moment in the White House Rose Garden 2 weekends ago, that's now viewed as a super spreader event.
The difference here is President Trump and I trust the American people to make choices in the best interest of their health. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris consistently talk about mandates, and not just mandates with the coronavirus, but a government takeover of health care,
Thank you.
the Green New Deal, all government control. We're about freedom and respecting the freedom of the American people.
Let's talk about respecting the American people. You respect the American people when you tell them the truth. You respect the American people when you have the courage to be a leader, speaking of those things that you may not want people to hear, but they need to hear so they can protect themselves.
Harris was asked if she'd take a vaccine approved by the Trump administration.
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. Absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
The fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives.
Turning an accusation often used against the Trump administration on its head. And while exchanges were generally respectful, barring a few interruptions here and there, this was also a night characterized by both nominees avoiding very direct questions. Among them, the Democrat avoiding a question about whether a Biden-Harris administration would seek to expand the Supreme Court were their party to lose the current nomination fight, or to both candidates about presidential disability given the advanced age of both Trump and Biden, or to the Republican about whether his side would accept the outcome of an election were they to lose, and why Americans should follow CDC guidelines during a pandemic when the White House itself refused to do so. And on climate change, this from the Republican.
The climate is changing, but the issue is, what's the cause, and what do we do about it? President Trump has made it clear that we're going to continue to listen to the science.
While issues of racism, including systemic racism in policing, also saw divergent views on stage.
Last week, the President of the United States took a debate stage in front of 70 million Americans and refused to condemn white supremacists.
Not true.
And
not true.
It wasn't like he didn't have a chance. He didn't do it, and then he doubled down. And then he said, when pressed, stand back, stand by. And this is a part of a pattern of Donald Trump's.
I must tell you, this presumption that you hear consistently from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that America is systemically racist. And that, as Joe Biden said, that he believes that law enforcement has an implicit bias against minorities, is a great insult to the men and women who serve in law enforcement. And I want everyone to know who puts on the uniform of law enforcement every day that President Trump and I stand with you.
Missing any earth-shattering moments, the debate is unlikely to shift the needle in any significant direction as the focus now shifts back to the top of the ticket and doubts about whether the next of 2 presidential debates will go ahead at all, given President Trump's coronavirus diagnosis. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.
And Sherwin joining us live from New York right now. So Sherwin, it was missing the drama of last week's presidential debate, but like you said, there were fiery moments. What were the main takeaways for you from last night's VP debate?
So you mean besides the fly on Mike Pence's head, Francis? Right. So, this was Mike Pence's debate to win in order to shift the trajectory. A number of polls have come out earlier this week that really shows the race widening in Biden-Harris's favor. A CNN poll giving them a 16-point lead, a NBC News Wall Street Journal a poll earlier giving a 14-point lead nationally, also showing the Biden-Harris camp leading in a number of swing states. And there wasn't a knockout punch in this debate. So the big takeaway is, yes, it was a more substantive debate. They got more into the issues. They didn't talk over each other, interrupt each other, much like we saw in the first debate in Cleveland, Ohio last week. But in terms of shifting where this race goes from here, I don't think any of the two campaigns can claim that they have, widened the race if you were Harris, or certainly closed the gap if you were Mike Pence yesterday. So in terms of the fundamentals here, I think we have a stalemate in terms of where we were before the debate. But let's listen to an associate professor at the University of Southern California, Christian Phillips, who weighed in on exactly what we saw last night.
Pence felt that his main task was to really make the case for continuing to trust in Trump to look after the voters that Trump has always looked after, regardless of how or what he had to say in terms of the truth or the facts or the actual policies. And Harris had a really difficult job, I think, in terms of needing to both make the case for the Biden campaign, attack Trump, and do it all while being as sort of passionate and sincere and authentic and authoritative and competent as she possibly could. And I think she succeeded. And it was really a refreshing change from last week. And I wish we could have another debate with this much policy substance.
Yeah, so over to the heads of the ticket, Biden and Trump, it moves back into their quarters now, given that the VP debate is behind us, Francis.
She said there, Sherwin, that there was more substance to this debate. But moving away from the actual content, one issue that stood out was how often the nominees avoided answering questions. They just chose to answer a previous question or just simply ignored the moderator. She didn't often follow up when questions were simply ignored as well.
Yeah, Susan Page, she's the Washington bureau chief of US Today, a daily newspaper here in the United States, and of course had a much better night than Fox News' Chris Wallace the week before, and asked really great questions, but didn't follow up when the respondents or the nominees just completely avoided her questions. And there were so many of these. I'll go through a couple of them. She asked Mike Pence, why should Americans follow CDC guidelines when the White House isn't following it themselves? Given the super spreader event they had at the White House, we now learning that some 34 White House staff have become infected in addition to the first couple. Didn't answer that. He was asked a question about if the Supreme Court were to strike down the Roe v. Wade decision, which essentially legalizes abortion in the United States and then sends it back to states where they can craft their own legislation. He was asked a question about what he would like to see in his state of Indiana, where he was governor before. He ducked the question, but did later say that he was pro-life and unapologetically so. He was also asked if they would accept the outcome of the election if they would lose. He said that he thought that they were going to win, but didn't say they would accept if they would lose. Kamala Harris also had one where she was asked if a Biden-Harris administration would seek to expand the Supreme Court if Ruth Bader Ginsburg's replacement nominee is successful. That would change the dynamic on the Supreme Court to a 6-3 conservative lean. And she also didn't answer that. Democrats are saying that that's a hypothetical question. Their big concern is the fact that this nomination process is continuing in the midst of an election, Francis. Over 5 million votes already cast in this election. And as the argument goes, the winner of this election should therefore decide on the lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. That really pretty much sums up where we were last night in terms of just, the complete evisceration of the question by completely ignoring it. And that's kind of left our heads scratching, Francis.
And as you've suggested, that doesn't help voters if they don't directly respond to those questions. There was also a lot of talk about the demeanor of Harris herself and that she had to find this balance between landing some blows but also not appearing as the angry black woman. Talk a bit about the dynamics on stage last night and how that translated on TV.
So we might see a number of women participate in primary debates as we get to who is going to be the number one and number two on a ticket. But once we reach this end stage, right, in terms of major party tickets that are running in a general election, you've only essentially had 4 women in the history of the 244-year history of the United States appear in these latter stage debates that are run by the Commission on Presidential Debates. You've had Geraldine Ferraro in a vice presidential debate in 1984. You've had Sarah Palin in 2008 as the running mate to John McCain, of course, losing to the historic candidacy of Barack Obama in that year. And of course, last year you had Hillary Clinton, who we all thought was certainly going to break the glass ceiling. She did, in fact, as the head of the Democratic ticket. But essentially, Kamala Harris was only the 4th woman and only the first woman of the first black woman and of South Asian descent to appear in one of these debates. So the scrutiny on how she would behave, her demeanor, her posture, alongside the unflappable Mike Pence, who really doesn't get rattled by much. His monotone delivery is consistent. He's a very good debater, doesn't ruffle his feathers. But someone also weighed in on this for us. Professor Ravi Perry is a chair of political science at Howard University, incidentally, where Kamala Harris studied in the 80s. Let's watch.
Kamala Harris did, I think, a very a firm and strong job in being clear. And being patient. She was interrupted several times by Vice President Pence. She had to sit there while he, made clear lies about her record and about Joe Biden's record, and that bite her tongue. She had several moments, certainly as Black Twitter has found noteworthy, where her facial expressions, were like, like a black mother's facial expression when your child is lying, but you let them finish, and that happened a lot.
I know that expression very well, Francis, and so does my behind.
Poor Sherwin. Finally, Sherwin, the other big development overnight, some choice words from President Trump describing Kamala Harris in a morning interview, and a major development from the Commission on Presidential Debates. Do tell.
Yeah, he did an interview on Fox Business News this morning. He called her a monster. He said she was terrible. He called her a communist, and that she was the monster was on stage with Mike Pence, who destroyed her last night. By the way, the monster says she's not going to eliminate fracking. That it won't be everything she said was a lie, the president's words. And of course, the big development is that the Commission on Presidential Debates announcing earlier today that they were going to move the format of the October 15th debate, essentially the second presidential debate, Francis, to a virtual event to protect everyone's health and safety. The president hit out immediately during that Fox News interview, saying that he wasn't going to waste his time. He didn't want to participate in a virtual event. The Biden campaign said they were happy with that format. We now understand that the Trump campaign has said, why don't we postpone the October 15th debate to October 22nd, which would have been the date for the third debate, and then move the third debate to October 29th, which is going to be just a few days before the November 3rd election. So there's a lot of back and forth going on between these campaigns. Nothing really settled at this time. But the big decision from the Commission on Presidential Debates is that if the October 15th one were to go ahead with both participating, that it will be a virtual event. I think they will be in the same arena but in different locations. And of course, this stems from the fact that the White House has not been forthcoming about the president's condition. There is a truth deficit in terms of what is coming out from his medical team, and the White House still refusing to answer when the president had his last negative COVID test, which would inform, the timeline here in terms of contact tracing, but also the trajectory of this virus in his body and when it would be safe to engage with him on a stage, and putting aside the fact that you're not getting the real information out of the White House, Francis.
All right. Thank you very much, Sherwin. So you'll follow the debating about the debates, how it's all going to work for us. Thank you very much. SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease.